On Saturday, June 4th, 1983, Bill Hughes' 11-year-old son, Chris, spent the night with the neighbors. The Ryens were a loving upper-middle-class family living in Chino Hills, California, part of San Bernardino County. Doug Ryan was a robust ex-Marine and military officer. His wife, Peggy, was also athletic in her own right. Both were gun enthusiasts. Peggy kept a loaded pistol in the dresser on her side of the bed, and Doug had a rifle in the closet on his. They had 2 children who were friendly with little Chris, 10-year-old Jessica and 8-year-old Josh. Bill called on Sunday morning, June 5th, to check on his son, but the line was busy, and maybe they went out for breakfast. Bill didn't think much of it. He showed up at the Ryan house around noon and knocked on the front door. When nobody answered, he peered through the window and saw something his brain refused to accept. The walls and the floors were covered in red. At first, he thought it was paint, but reality snuck in seconds later. Bill kicked in the front door to find a total bloodbath. He rushed over to his son, who was dead on the floor, stabbed 25 times in the head, chest, and arms. He then found Doug and Peggy stripped naked and stabbed over 30 times each. Poor Jessica bled out in her parents' doorway, stabbed over 46 times. Miraculously, 8-year-old Josh was still alive. The little boy crawled across the floor toward Bill. His throat slit and his skull fractured. EMTs rushed him to the hospital, where a social worker named Dawn met with the traumatized boy. Even though he'd been through hell, Josh was alert and responsive. He couldn't speak due to the injury to his neck, but he was aware enough to answer yes or no questions. Now, memory is a fleeting thing, especially after head trauma. The first few hours were crucial to understanding what happened that night in Chino Hills. Dawn grabbed a piece of paper and wrote down the alphabet, the numbers 1 through 10, and the words yes and no. Imagine a makeshift Ouija board. He then asked Josh a series of baseline questions, such as, what's your name? How old are you? And when is your birthday? Josh answered each question correctly by pointing to the letters, numbers, and the words yes and no, proving that Dawn's makeshift method could work for now. Then he started in with the real questions. The people who did this, were they black? Josh answered no. Were they white? Josh replied yes. How many were there? Josh indicated either 3 or 4, though he wasn't sure. The hospital was a chaotic scene, so Dawn asked the questions again to ensure Josh was answering truthfully. And he was, and he gave the same answers to the repeated questions. Later, when San Bernardino deputies interviewed the boy, Josh referred to his attackers as they and them, indicating multiple suspects. It's worth noting that Josh changed his story to 3 Hispanic men later on that same day.
Did somebody come up to your place looking for work?
Yes.
And who was that?
3 Mexicans.
Did those 3 Mexicans talk to anyone?
Yeah, I talked to my dad.
And eventually, 2 years later, Josh said he didn't remember seeing anybody at all, just a single dark shadow.
What did you see?
I don't know, really saw almost like a shadow or something.
Where did you see the shadow?
Like the bathroom's here. I saw it right on the bathroom.
How many shadows did you see?
Just one.
Just the one?
The sheriff's department tore the Ryan house apart, uncovering evidence that backed up Josh's story. They found blondish brown hair clenched in Jessica's hand as if torn out in a struggle. They also determined the killers used 3 weapons on everyone in the family: a hatchet, an ice pick, and 1 or 2 knives. The family station wagon was also missing, and as the investigation progressed, several witnesses reported seeing 3 white men driving a similar car that night. In fact, several other witnesses reported seeing 3 disorderly white men at the Canyon Coral Bar on the night of the murders, not too far from the Ryan home. They had blood on their clothes, and they left in a car similar to the missing station wagon. North of the bar, police recovered a tan, blood-stained T-shirt discarded on the side of the road. South of the bar, they found a blue bloodstained t-shirt also left on the side of the road, as if someone took them off while driving and tossed them out the window in 2 different spots. One woman who wished to stay anonymous said 3 white men in a station wagon cut her off, almost causing a car accident. The driver had wavy, shoulder-length, dirty blonde hair, but she didn't get a good look at the others. Her grandmother sat next to her and wrote down the license plate number. The following day, when the police released the station wagon description and plate number, the woman couldn't believe what she was hearing. She ran out to look at the little piece of paper her grandmother wrote on, and it was a match. Finally, a woman named Diana came forward, saying her estranged husband, Lee Furrow, came home in a station wagon dressed in bloody overalls. A hatchet was also missing from his tool shed, a hatchet that resembled the one described by police. Now, Lee himself was a convicted murderer in prison for strangling a 17-year-old girl in 1974, but a plea deal saw him released from prison a year before the Chino Hills massacre. But possibly the most damning detail from Diana's report was about the tan t-shirt she laid out for him on the morning of June 4th. He wasn't wearing the shirt when he came home that night. But when he stripped off the overalls and left them on the closet floor, Diana picked them up and turned them over to police. And several days later, Lee cut off most of his hair and shaved his face, 2 of his most identifiable features. The San Bernardino Sheriff's Department had plenty of evidence and descriptions in their laps. They were looking for 3 white men, one with shoulder-length dirty blonde hair who'd stolen the Ryens station wagon after murdering them in cold blood. They were last seen at the Canyon Coral Bar, and one of them may have returned home that night in bloody overalls. Overalls the police had in their possession, thanks to Diana. Unfortunately, instead of testing the pants, they threw them out. Why would they completely disregard a piece of potential evidence? Because they had a new suspect in their sights, a 25-year-old black man named Kevin Cooper. He'd just escaped from a minimum security Chino prison 2 days earlier. He was in jail for burglary, but had a lengthy rap sheet dating back to his childhood. And coincidentally, he was laying low in an abandoned house about 125 yards from the Ryens. Despite every piece of testimony and evidence they'd been given, including Lee's bloody overalls, the investigation pivoted to focus only on Kevin. Unfortunately for Kevin, his criminal history, recent escape, and a trip to Tijuana didn't help his case. Born Richard Goodman in 1958, his birth mother put him up for adoption at an orphanage in Pittsburgh. He was 6 months old when Melvin and Esther Cooper adopted him and changed his name to Kevin. But the Cooper household wasn't a dream come true. Little Kevin lived through years of physical abuse and ran away from home whenever he could. He was in and out of juvenile custody and was imprisoned in the late 70s for robbing a home in Pittsburgh. Before the Ryan murders, Cooper had never been charged with a violent crime. However, 2 different women have accused him of rape, one in 1982 and another in 1983 after the Ryan murders. He was never charged for either assault and vehemently denied the charges, but the evidence against him in both cases was pretty strong. In 1982, Kevin escaped from a Pennsylvania psychiatric facility and fled to California, but life in LA wasn't any different, and Kevin landed back in jail after being convicted on 2 more burglary charges. He was serving a 4-year sentence at the California Institution for Men in Chino and was assigned to the minimum security section in April of '83. On June 2nd, 2 days before the Ryan murders, Kevin climbed through a hole in the fence and simply walked away from jail. That's when he found an abandoned home called the Lease House to lay low while he devised a plan. He made a few phone calls asking for money, but nobody could help him out. So when the sun set on June 4th, Kevin hitchhiked down to Mexico. A hotel in Tijuana confirmed that Kevin checked in around 4:30 p.m. on June 5th, about 130 miles south of Chino Hills, California. So while Kevin could have killed the Ryans and fled to Mexico in that time frame, there are other facts of the case that don't make any sense. Let's start with the coroner's report. The initial report indicated that several assailants used a hatchet, an ice pick, and 1 or 2 knives to slash and stab the victims 140 times. This means that Kevin, a 155-pound man possibly malnourished from being on the run for 2 days, somehow overpowered a 6'2" ex-Marine Doug and his athletic wife Peggy. Remember, Doug and Peggy kept loaded guns within arm's reach of their bed, so even if Kevin overpowered one of them, the other could easily blow him away. Then there's the issue of the weapons. How many murderers bring 3 different weapons to a crime scene and casually change between them as they slaughter 4 people? But investigators say that's what happened, and they pointed to a drop of blood found in the house matching Kevin's blood type. But in a shocking twist reported by NBC News, the state's original test on blood in the house did not match Kevin. Then a later test did, and the state changed the criminologist's original notes about the shift. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's talk about the tan and blue shirts found near the Canyon Coral Bar. If what the police say is true, Kevin either wore 2 shirts while killing the Ryens or changed shirts in the middle of it. Again, plausible, but highly unlikely, especially for a recently escaped convict. Finally, there's the issue of Doug's station wagon. Police recovered the car near Lee's stepmother's house while Kevin was working on a sailboat in Tijuana. They found blood in the driver's seat, passenger seat, and back seat, indicating 3 people were sitting in the car. So, unless Kevin decided for some reason to sit in all 3 seats, he couldn't have stolen that car. Police also recovered the hatchet used to kill the Ryens and determined it was thrown out of the passenger side window after the killer fled. On June 6, the day after the killings, 2 deputies searched Kevin's hideout but couldn't find any substantial evidence. They returned the next day, now that Kevin was their primary suspect, and discovered proof they apparently missed the first time. They found a green, blood-stained button belonging to a prison jacket and a hatchet sheath near Kevin's makeshift bedroom. Both were in plain view. But here's the thing about that button from the green prison jacket. Kevin was wearing a brown jacket when he escaped. Then again, the police would have you believe Kevin liked to wear 2 layers of different colored clothes all the time. So maybe he brought a change of prison jackets when he escaped. One of the officers who initially searched the house denied ever setting foot in the bedroom. The next day, when deputies found the button and sheath on the bedroom floor, they also found that officer's fingerprints proving that he'd been there. So either the first officer was wholly incompetent and missed evidence that was in plain view, or he planted it so someone would find it the next day. Many lean towards the latter. Sheriff's deputies also found several cigarette butts in the Lease house that belonged to Kevin. A week later, when the station wagon turned up, they searched it up and down but couldn't find anything linking Kevin to the car. Then, upon another miracle second search, they found the same cigarette butts. However, the butts from the Lease house were never processed into evidence, thus pretty easy to move and plant. Despite all the contradictory evidence and the ludicrous story and the incompetent police work, a jury of his peers convicted Kevin Cooper of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. One juror said they wouldn't have reached a verdict had there been one less piece of evidence. Perhaps the blood found on the tan t-shirt was the most damning in Kevin's case. Somehow, it matched his. The scene outside the courtroom was a sickening display of 1980s racism and homophobia at its finest. The June 29th issue of the San Bernardino Sun falsely painted Kevin as a homosexual who frequently associated with transvestites. He liked to visit bars and discos where drugs are available and usually stayed in lower-income neighborhoods. A crowd gathered outside the court building carrying racially charged signs. One man even had a stuffed gorilla hung on a noose. They almost got their wish on February 10th, 2004, when Kevin was supposed to die. He denied his last meal the night before, and guards led him to a holding cell next to the execution room. They strip-searched him and issued him a new pair of clothes to die in. They inspected his arms for healthy veins, and a priest sat with him to pray. But hours before he was supposed to die, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals blocked the execution, and the warden called it off. And Kevin's defense team was allowed to retest the blood on the t-shirt. Until then, Kevin believed the police planted his blood on the t-shirt to seal the deal. To prove Kevin's theory, the lab tested for a substance called EDTA, a preservative used to keep blood from clotting, especially in test tubes. So while the test confirmed it was Kevin's blood on the t-shirt, they also found EDTA in the blood, meaning it didn't come straight from Kevin. And as the record shows, the police took samples of Kevin's blood when they arrested him and kept it in test tubes with EDTA. But it only gets crazier from there. The lab tested the blood in Kevin's sample and found it contained blood from 2 or more people. There is no reasonable situation where the crime lab would combine people's blood samples. If they did, the tampered evidence should have been enough to declare a mistrial, if not exonerate Kevin altogether. That, or someone stole blood from the vial, planted it on the shirt, and then replaced it with another sample, perhaps their own. Judge William Fletcher, a Court of Appeals judge and one of Kevin's most vocal allies, said it best. While speaking at an NYU law school, he asked the students to remember how teenagers steal liquor from their parents. They replace whatever they drink with water to make it look like nothing happened. Kevin's case gained traction after the EDTA findings, but still ran into roadblocks. Fletcher and his colleagues wrote a 100-page rebuttal saying, "The state of California may be about to execute an innocent man." Meanwhile, many groups came to Kevin's aid, including human rights organizations, anti-death penalty groups, and the ACLU. But politics and a corrupt justice system kept beating them back. Another judge blocked any attempt to examine the multiple blood samples in Kevin's vial. Then, in 2019, the vial was found empty. In 2004, Kevin had filed a motion for clemency to Governor Schwarzenegger, but the Terminator terminated his petition, and Kevin tried to appeal to Governor Schwarzenegger again in 2010, this time with the DNA evidence to back him up. Schwarzenegger was intrigued, but was set to leave office in a few weeks. He petitioned Governor-elect Jerry Brown to take another look at the case. But Brown had some verbal skeletons in his closet. Before becoming governor, Brown was the California Attorney General, and during that time, he suggested that nobody on death row was innocent. He was replaced by Kamala Harris in 2011, but the future vice president didn't help either. As AG, Kamala refused to permit any advanced DNA testing on the t-shirt in Kevin's story, showing little interest in the case in general. She pivoted from that stance in 2018, saying, "As a firm believer in DNA testing, I hope the governor and the state will allow for such testing in the case of Kevin Cooper." In his last interview with 48 Hours in 2003, Josh maintained that Kevin killed his family and has to pay the price. In a 2018 letter to then Governor Jerry Brown, Josh wrote, "Kevin Cooper is a liar. He lies about everything. When he is caught in his lies, he lies more and more. He gets other people to believe in and broadcasts his lies." In 2021, Governor Gavin Newsom petitioned a law firm to dig into Kevin's story as part of his most recent clemency application. But with several dead witnesses and a whole bunch of missing evidence, there's little hope this law firm will find the smoking gun needed to exonerate Kevin. As of 2022, Kevin is a 64-year-old man still sitting on death row and still insisting that he's an innocent man. As for Lee Furrow, he denies any involvement in the massacre. However, NBC reported that a jailhouse informant claimed Lee was responsible, and the murders were meant to be revenge killings, but they got the wrong house and the wrong family. But to this day, Kevin Cooper is the only man charged with the killings. So, what do you think happened? And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.